After interviewing a lot of entrepreneurs on my podcast, they would bring up the point of working on something you're passionate about. So, were you passionate about healing people's feet?
Well,
Hey everyone, this is Rick, and welcome back to The Seed, the Startup Journey, the entrepreneurship podcast sharing the origin stories of amazing founders and their companies in less than 20 minutes. Today, I'll be chatting with the guy who co-founded one of the most active venture capital firms in the United States. He has also been named one of the top 100 entrepreneurship professors in the world. He is Cliff Holekamp, co-founder and managing director of Cultivation Capital. Hey Cliff, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm going to actually start by reading some of your titles. Um,
oh,
so you've been named top 100 entrepreneurship professors in the world. You've been on the board of at least 9 companies, and you founded Cultivation Capital, and it's now the most active firm in the Midwest. So my question is, how did you first get started?
well, I guess it's all just one step at a time, right? When you look back, it seems like a lot, but as you're going, it doesn't feel like it. It just feels like you're getting out there every day and doing your thing. I could look at a couple places where I could say it started. One obvious would be when I started my first company, Foot Healers, out of the MBA program at Washington University. But in another sense, I would say it really started back in high school when I worked in door-to-door sales. I had a summer job in high school selling encyclopedias door to door in South Central LA. And that's really what I believe was the most influential business experience I had, and where I really learned the fundamentals and principles of being able to sell something, right? To be able to take an idea, talk to customers, listen to their needs, understand what their needs are, and to position what I had to sell to meet their needs. And through that experience, it really became the basis to me of becoming an entrepreneur.
So did you know back then in high school that you wanted to start your own thing in the future?
Well, maybe, maybe not. I definitely was interested in entrepreneurship. I was figured just by default that I'd be in some kind of business, but probably didn't have the clarity to know exactly how or what.
Mhm. Yeah, and you mentioned that your first company was Foot Healers. So I was just wondering because after interviewing a lot of entrepreneurs on my podcast, they would bring up the point of working on something you're passionate about. So were you passionate about healing people's feet?
Well, I hate to be the exception to the rule. Not particularly passionate about feet in particular. In fact, I kind of sometimes find feet a little gross. But what I was passionate about was customer service. And I don't know about you, but I had a lot of negative experiences in medical environments, situations where I didn't feel like I was treated with compassion or even treated with basic, decent customer service. I often point out that we have a higher expectation at customer service at a restaurant than we do at our doctor's office. And it's
Mhm.
ridiculous. I mean, getting a cheeseburger is so routine, but going to a doctor is a really intimidating, scary, overwhelming experience. And shouldn't the doctor be treating you with more customer service than the place where you get your cheeseburger? And so I did have a real passion about changing the paradigm in the healthcare service environments to be much more focused on the customer experience. So, I guess you don't have to be passionate about everything, but you have to find your passion within what you're doing.
And after Foot Healers, I think you went on to teach at WashU for entrepreneurship. How did you get into doing that?
Well, I sold Foot Healers in 2007. So I started it, by the way, in 2001. And 2007 had an unexpected offer to buy the company. Took the offer and found myself thinking about what's next. And I assumed I would probably buy a company. I thought I might buy a small business, which had a lot of potential to grow. Some of the first people I talked to network were my old professors at WashU.
Mhm.
One of them was Bart Hamilton, and Professor Hamilton said, "Well, I don't know if I know of any good acquisition prospects for you, but," he said, "I sure know we could use some help around here." So he asked if I'd be interested in taking on an adjunct intro to entrepreneurship class. And that went really well and got all tens in the student reviews. And then at the end of that first semester, they asked if I'd come back full time.
Yeah, and I think it ended up super well. Like many of your students went on to have tremendous success, including Chuck Cohn, who's from Varsity Tutors. I believe they are recently like a unicorn,
Yes, they are.
valued at like $1.7 billion. Yeah.
Yep.
So I was wondering, as a professor and an investor, have you noticed anything in common between successful entrepreneurs? Maybe there's particular skills or traits.
There are. First, I want to point out that there's also a lot of traits they don't have in common. You don't have to see yourself exactly in somebody who's gone before you. And I also want to point out there's different levels of success. It is just as valid and worthy and a wonderful career pursuit to maybe run a small business that isn't high growth, but provides you with independence and this feeling of pride of having your own business and security of owning your own business. It doesn't necessarily have to turn into Varsity Tutors for it to be a rewarding experience. So I think, first of all, I kind of turn that question around and ask about the entrepreneur, about what kind of work environment they thrive in. And how do they do working in an unstructured environment? How do they feel about working on a broader basis, on an enterprise-wide view of a business versus specializing into something very narrow and specific? And if you still thrive in that environment, then maybe it's for you. When I think about it from an investor perspective, what do I look for that's going to lead to very high growth companies? Then I might then look for qualities that might be a little bit more extraordinary, because only 2% of companies get venture capital, right? But there's 98% of other companies that are great self-owned, self-employed business opportunities. And I think one of the first things I look for is a sense of urgency. They are in a hurry to get things done. They respond quickly. They have a ravenous appetite for information to consume and to produce. And so you're looking for that high degree of productivity and output. And the best way I have to sort of explain that personality type is a sense of urgency. And you can almost tell when you meet somebody and you work with them a little bit, you talk with them a little bit, or do they return calls very quickly? When there's a question about something unknown, do they get to the answer and find it quickly? Does it bother them not to get it, that answer right away? So looking for that sense of urgency, I do find associated with successful high growth entrepreneurs.
I love that. And I totally agree. Like it never gets boring interviewing all these successful entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs in general because everyone has their own startup journey. So Cliff, you've accomplished so many things, but I'm sure there's also a lot of tough moments. So I was wondering if you could share with us some of the moments where you failed and how those impacted you moving forward.
There have been a few, for sure. I think one of the important lessons I learned, which definitely I carry with me today, was in the early years of Foot Healers, literally the first 2 years. And when I first started a company, I wanted everything to be perfect. And I thought through every single detail. Rick, it was to the point where, I was managing exactly what magazines were on the coffee table in the waiting room and managing exactly the musical choices that were played and, what was running on the TV. And I was even managing how the waiting room smelled. And that's all great, right? And those are all led to, because as you might recall, I had this obsession with the customer experience. And so there's a flip side of that coin. They always say your greatest strength is your greatest weakness, because part of obsessing over the customer experience is I wasn't obsessing over necessarily things that were the most important. And what I find is when you focus in the minutia and you're buried in the details across the board about everything, that you're not focusing and emphasizing your efforts on those things that really matter the most. Perfection can be the enemy of success for entrepreneurs, and that you are often better being approximately right, but driving the business forward than getting it exactly right and holding the business back. And it really took maybe almost 2 years before I realized that I was driving my employees crazy. How the office smelled didn't mean more revenue for the company, right? It didn't change the economic performance in a meaningful way. Now, there's so many things that impact the economic performance. What you need to do is focus on the 2 or 3 that impact it the most. We talk about focusing on the things that move the needle. And when you're an early stage entrepreneur, you don't have the capacity to do everything perfectly. You're not a big corporation with all those assets and resources and people and infrastructure. You by definition, entrepreneurs are operating with a lack of resources. So when you have a lack of resources, you need to concentrate your resources, your biggest maybe being your own time and attention, into those things that matter the most, rather than spreading out that time and attention over everything. And so when I changed my approach and focused on the important things and let some things go, which was painful. It was so painful to let things go, right? The things that I knew should be fixed, knew that I could do it better, or it should be done better. But the truth is, by focusing on that, I was hurting the overall impact of the business. So when I changed my management style to focus on just the things that move the needle, our economic performance immediately went a whole level higher.
Totally. Yeah. Like I remember in the very beginning of my podcast, I would try to push subtitles on every episode, like make sure each thing is like spelled correctly. And it's just not really worth the time. So yeah, I agree. So where would you say you are now along your startup journey? Like I know you just moved to South Carolina to expand Cultivation Capital. Do you have some sort of end goal in mind?
Every time I make an end goal, I realize it was wrong. So I have learned not to make predictions on end goals. I really have a wonderful peace of mind that I don't have a specific end goal. I just get up every day and build. And maybe that's the wrong advice. Maybe that's the wrong way to look at things. But every goal I've had, I've ended up surprising myself and exceeding it. And so maybe this is just part of being over 40, is that I'm just happy to be just on my journey. And I just find a great peace of mind in doing that, right? That I just keep driving forward, and every day I wake up and say, what am I going to do to drive things forward and keep advancing and keep having a stimulating and interesting career, building the company, learning, and I'd also add making an impact on the communities where I operate. And so as long as I just keep pushing every single day, I find that the goalposts keep moving back, and I love it, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, you're always constantly doing so many different things. So I was wondering if you have any sort of productivity hacks or time management tips.
One of the things I did a couple of years ago, which has brought me, again, a wonderful peace of mind, is I moved to zero inbox. So I don't know how you handle your mail, but mine would get pretty long, and things would get buried down below, and then you'd get stressed about what you missed, and then you'd have to reread all your emails to find the one that you're not sure if you got lost. And so then for a while, I sort of categorized them by read and unread. I forget all that. Every single email, it either gets deleted, it gets filed, or it gets acted upon. Now, it might annoy some other people in my life because I want them to be on that same level where I need to get everything filed, deleted, or acted upon. But that keeps me definitely ahead of the curve. And right now I have 4 emails in my inbox, which is pretty good. So I don't always get it to absolute zero because it immediately starts filling again, but I usually have it under 10. Which is pretty nice because I can always keep track and know exactly, what is not acted upon, and it just keeps me very productive. So it's a sad thing that email is a proxy for our personal productivity, but at least in my world it is.
I recently signed up for Superhuman, like the whole like zero inbox thing as well, and it's super awesome. So yeah. And do you have any advice, I guess, for someone like me who is still a student but interested in entrepreneurship and wants to potentially build something of my own in the future?
Yeah, people come up with great ideas for entrepreneurial ideas because they're into something else. So it's hard to just be into entrepreneurship because that is too generic. You're not just an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur of something, right? You're in some kind of industry. You came up with an idea that serves a certain customer. And so to find those ideas, you have to get engaged in the world around you. And so you have to gain expertise on other things. I'll just personally give you my own example. I didn't know anything about healthcare. The way I got into foot healers was I was visiting my mom, who had recently married a podiatrist. He made a comment to me. He's like, wow, if I had a business degree, I bet I really could do so much better in my practice.
Mhm.
And, it would have been very easy for me to just have said, oh, yeah, totally. That's so true. And then gone to the beach the next day. But for whatever lucky reason, my response was, well, I don't know, maybe I could come to the office with you sometime and learn more about what you do and see if that's really true or not. And he says, oh, yeah, well, I'd love that. And I said, maybe I could put together a little consulting project for you for free, figure out some ways we can make your office more efficient. And so I don't even know why I said that. I'm so glad I did. Part of the motivation is probably just to get to know my stepfather better. Part of the reason was just intellectual curiosity, that because he was a podiatrist, that's something I should know more about. Like, I knew nothing about podiatry, and that desire to learn more about him and to have curiosity about him and to learn about his business led to me understanding about the opportunities in that business. So it was in the process of doing that consulting report that I recognized that there was so much opportunity left on the table. And that became the genesis for Foot Healers. But that never would have come to me if I didn't volunteer to do a free consulting project.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true of most ideas. People come up with ideas because they're into something else, right? Jim McKelvey, I know you talked to him a few weeks ago, and he wouldn't have come up with Square if he wasn't a glass blower.
Mm-hmm.
And then beyond that, if he wasn't a glass blower trying to sell his glass, then you come up with an idea for credit processing and banking. Well, it doesn't seem like a straight line, but it is. And it actually just started, ironically and strangely, with him wanting to understand how to blow glass.
I love that. To kind of wrap things up, I actually prepared a little game. It's called Underrated or Overrated.
You're not going to get me in trouble here, are you?
I hope not.
Underrated, overrated.
Yeah, the first one, electric cars.
Underrated. Our world's going to change. It's just a matter of when.
Bitcoin.
Oh, it's not underrated, but it's overvalued.
Yeah, I think it just reached like 50,000 or something recently. So
there's no utility in a Bitcoin beyond what you think somebody else will pay you for it. I'm going to have to say, as a mechanism for payment, not overrated, but I'll still say it's too expensive.
Gotcha. And then the next one is waking up early.
Overrated.
What's the reason for that?
I'm just not a morning person. I'll tell you, I don't sleep late. I get up at around 7, which is pretty late for a professional. I would much rather work late in the office than have to get up early to get to the office.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. This next one is Silicon Valley.
Oh, overrated. The rest of us are coming for it. So it is overheated. It is oversaturated. The number of disadvantages of being there are piling up, and the rest of the country will maybe not catch up all the way, but we're going to catch up a lot of the way, and we're well on our way to doing that.
Yeah, I think through Cultivation Capital, you also demonstrated you could do it. So
that's what we're all about.
That's awesome. And then an MBA degree.
People that get an MBA degree just because they think those 3 letters in their name are going to get them an extra $20,000 a year in salary are not yielding the true value. But if you really go there to learn, you can advance your career 10 years if you take full advantage of the opportunity. But 80% of the people don't. If you're just there to make more money at graduation, then you're going to find that's all you're going to get out of it. And it would be overrated. But for me, that less than 2 years gave me a 10-year jump in my career.
That's awesome. So this is the very last question, which is, what is the best advice you ever received?
Boy, I wasn't ready for that question.
Yeah, I save it for last because it's usually the hardest to answer.
Well, I'm going to have to settle for good advice that I've ever received because I'm not able to index every piece of advice I've ever received in real time. Living within your means. For me, ultimately, entrepreneurship was a means to have freedom. There's so many things it can be about, and it's great. Whatever motivates people, they should seize that. But for me, the motivation is freedom. And the secret to maintaining financial freedom is living within your means and not worrying about keeping up with the Joneses. And I just hope that for everyone. I hope that for the entrepreneurs I work with, I hope that for my students, is that entrepreneurship is a means for them to achieve that level of personal freedom. And it doesn't have to mean that you're living like Zuckerberg, on private jets. It's different for everybody, but whatever level of financial attainment you've achieved, and you can have happiness anywhere along that spectrum, make sure to live within that things, so you're not pushing those boundaries. That extra vacation, that extra car, it's not worth jeopardizing that stability and peace that you have when you live with financial security.
I love that. So that's it for today's interview. Thank you, Cliff, so much for coming on today. I wish you the best of luck and stay safe as well.
You too. Thanks so much, Rick.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. That was under 20 minutes, but if you would like to hear my takeaways from chatting with Cliff, stick around. My first takeaway is to focus on things that move the needle. Cliff is super obsessed with customer service, but that got to a point where he was managing every single aspect of his podiatry business. That includes what magazine is on the table as well as how the waiting room smells. Those are obviously good things to think about, but they aren't the most important. And when you're an entrepreneur, especially early stage, you don't have a lot of resources and time. And so really focusing on what's actually the most important for the business is key. And if you're wondering what type of entrepreneurs Cliff looks for when he is investing in startups, he really values founders who have a sense of urgency. How fast do they respond? Are they bothered by having problems that are unsolved? These are things that are good to reflect on, but keep in mind that venture capital isn't for everyone. You could have a really successful business without having any VC funding at all. Finally, for someone as busy and as productive as Cliff, what sorts of productivity hacks does he have? Zero inbox, and that's something that I would actually second as well. Having a system where I could easily sort through my emails, quickly respond to things, and just keep my inbox clean has made me a lot more productive as well. I personally use Superhuman, and if you would like a referral, just message me. That's it for the takeaways. This week's Startup Droplet is submitted by Ben from St. Louis, who wanted to highlight the DJ Blau, who recently sold 33 NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, around his album for a total of $11.6 million. The NFT space is blowing up, and if you're not sure what I'm talking about, I highly recommend you looking into it. Some of the things that you will see will blow your mind. If you also have an idea you'd like to share, or if you come across a startup that's super cool, make sure you message us on Instagram and we'll be sure to feature that for the next Startup Droplet. That's it for today's episode. Make sure you like this video and subscribe, and let's grow a seed of innovation and creativity together. I'll see you next time.